Hello, and welcome to Rule of Carnage, a conversation between me, Mike, and him, Glenn, on the topic of designing better miniature games. Now, we are in, I think, a small, maybe it's a mini series of conversations about futzing with Gaslands. I said a couple of episodes ago that we've been just tinkering because we're tinkerers. And what we've been tinkering with is some things about Gaslands Refueled that I still don't feel are exactly right. And we hear a lot of feedback from the community and a lot of stuff in the Facebook groups. And my word, we might even start hearing it from people in person in game conventions. And we're wrestling with some of the core concerns that new players in particular have when they arrive at the doorstep of Gaslands and they ring the bell and they have their first game. And I think we mentioned it on a previous episode, but one of the things that they quite often say is, we had a lovely time, nobody made it to gate one. So they played Gaslands for the first time. They decided to play a death race because Gaslands shoves you very hard in that direction. And then maybe they decided to play 50 can teams because Gaslands tells you that standard. And maybe they all lined up on the start line and they all crashed into each other and exploded and flipped over. And maybe they made it to gate one and some people started machine gunning each other. And basically everything was dead. And we quite often also hear from people, oh yeah, we very rarely finish a race. Maybe 1 in 5 races finish on the finish line. And that isn't my experience of the game, but that is something that we hear very, very routinely. And I suppose that is the topic of this conversation, which is resilience, and should everything have more hull points, and how do you make the game both have the cars on the table for longer, but also not make the game even longer, because that's one of the other problems we're working with. But yeah, so Glenn, do you want to just expound a little bit on where you've been scratching and tinkering here?
So one of the first few ideas that sort of, because I think what we don't want to do, what I don't want to do, is I don't want to nerf a whole bunch of stuff. I don't want to just sort of strip back all the weapons and all the collisions, and we're already talking about making evades more interesting and worthwhile, because I don't want people who enjoy the impact of Gaslands and seeing things blow up and having an effective fighting team to go, okay, well, you've just taken away a bunch of my toys. So what we're shooting,
I'm just gonna highlight something there. So one of the design challenges of working in Gaslands is quite often an idea will seem obvious, and we will have to remind ourselves that there are 3 kinds of teams in Gaslands. There's people who race, there's people who brawl, and there's people who shoot. And as we're thinking about this resilience thing, we're always holding in our mind, okay, is this resilience that only benefits 2 of those and shooters become rubbish? Or if we make collisions worse, does that just nerf the brawlers and the other guys get a boost? So that's, I guess, what you're talking about there.
Yeah, that we're trying to sort of find things that work for give more interesting choices, keep teams running for longer, and keep everybody sort of still active, and keep what was good before good and interesting, without still having the point where games tend to end with everything dying. So one of the first ideas I've been looking at with this is so in relation to Gaslands Refueled, there is a campaign system that has wasteland salvage abilities within it. So basically what happens there is, when certain vehicles get damaged, bits fall off of them, and you can pick those bits up and they go in as cans into your supply, and later on you can use them to build up your team. And it's the way that you sort of get experience and sort of progress within that campaign. I think Mike sort of emailed something over and he used the word ramshackle specifically in relation to some of the cars in Gaslands, and it does. I had this idea of this thing that we've been terming Ramshackle Resilience, where you hit somebody, a bit of their car falls off, So long as it's a bit that's been strapped on that was doing a job other than keeping the car running,
It's
I
not
can
an
afford.
important bit. A secondary importance piece just fell off.
Well, if I strap a massive ram onto my car, one presumes that it is chunky, metallic, and thick, and you could hit it with, some ordnance, and that wouldn't stop the car from running or have the wheels fall off. But the ram might cease to be a useful ram at that point.
Yeah, or
Um,
it's like Smokey and the Bandit, where he gets all the way across America and he doesn't have any doors or anything left. But
yeah.
they were the ablative armor.
Yes, yeah. So the fundamental idea of Ramshackle Resilience is that you can get hit by something, and it can be either for hazards or hull damage. And for one step, you can ignore that by having an upgrade on the car drop off. Basically, you remove the upgrade, and then that step's worth of damage is ignored. And then the bit of the car that dropped off gets plonked onto the table as a little token, and then somebody else can run over that, grab it up, strap it onto their car, and they get a new junk upgrade, which does absolutely nothing other than the fact it's an upgrade that can later on get blown off by another hit. So there's a bunch of reasons why that isn't just a way of nerfing shooty teams, for example. First of all, one of the things that's interesting is that racing teams don't tend to like upgrades very much. Racing teams tend to like perks, and maybe some dropped weapons, but upgrades aren't wildly useful to them. Upgrades are a lot more popular for brawling teams, and then to a lesser degree shooting teams. So in many ways, the fact that the people you most want to, you're going to get most kicked in the teeth by not being able to shoot up anymore as racers, doesn't necessarily sort of impact on Ramshackle Resilience. And I'm willing to bet that the average Rutherford team, if they're told that Miyazaki is no longer taking power slides so that she can carry a ram, will only be joyful at that change in the meta. And so what it does mean is that a lot of the brawling teams, a lot of the teams that are struggling to get out of the pack, are smacking into each other, and people are dropping off smaller, less important upgrades, sometimes even just to avoid hazards and wipe out. And then the person next to them is just snaffling it right up. And it means that if you're within the pack and you're getting smashed and bullied and bounced back and forth, there's this stuff all over the place that's going to keep you running until you get clear of the pack again, at which point you're kind of a free target for the shooters. And so it doesn't inherently weaken the shooting elements of the game. It doesn't inherently weaken the fighters, but it does keep the pack, where you're just end up with wrecks all over the place, rolling that little bit longer, and it gives you that extra little bit of survivability to get clear of that pack. Because I think one of the things we've realized with the experience of playing the game that we have, the experience that our playtesters have, is that once you know the game well enough and you can sort of navigate well enough, you get out of that pack as soon as you possibly can. And once everyone's clear of that pack, the game rolls on. People don't die, you do complete races. But if you never get clear of it, either because you haven't sort of learnt the tricks of doing it, or because you just get mashed in so badly that you've never managed to get clear of it, you never sort of break through to that other stage. And so it's just a way of giving people that extra little bit of support until that pack breaks and splinters out, and then everyone can go and see the wide vistas of the rest of the race and start racing. So I think that's the theory behind Ramshackle Resilience, and I came up with it as this sort of general idea, and sort of showed it to Mike. Mike was like, I think this should maybe be more widely present within Gaslands. You seem to like.
I think it's extremely interesting. Like, it is, broadly speaking, a rule I couldn't write. for all the reasons that you've just laid out there. Like it's too subtle for me. But one of the things that I am thoughtful about with it is, so one of the things that happens is that when you drop an upgrade, you drop a little token. And so there's a few mechanical things going on there. Like one is I have to be using the system well enough to like figure out that I've got upgrades and that I want to buy them. Then another thing is like I bought an upgrade and then maybe in the first couple of activations, I'm going to lose that upgrade permanently. So why did I buy it? That's a difficult decision. And then there's the faff of like putting the token down. And then there's the interest of like maybe being able to pick it up again. And then there's the faff of like, okay, I pick it up, but it's not actually in the way that we've written at the moment, you've written at the moment. It's not the same upgrade. It's not like I pick up your RAM or I pick up your nitro because I probably can't like put the nitro wired in correctly, but at least is some ablative armor that I can scrap on. And so mechanically, it's really, really nice, but it's also like, it's quite advanced. And I worry about, well, I guess two things I'm thoughtful about. One is I'm thoughtful about, could a first time player group deal with all of that sort of intrigue and complexity? And then the other is, well, when you set it against the other sort of subsystems in the game that are doing somewhat similar things, whether it's the attack system or the evade system or the hull system or the vote system or the hazard system, like where does it fit in that constellation? And is it actually like, is it a better system than any of those and that it should just be that, or it should replace two or three of them? I've just weirdly had like the sudden urge to try and figure out whether I'm kind of obsessed with that cover shooting mechanic in Gears of War, where you don't have a health bar, you just take damage, and if you take damage in a sustained way for long enough, you die. Like in a way, Ramshackle Resilience is kind of like that. It's a bit like saying at the beginning of the game, like the first few hits don't count because, you know, they don't. And then you'll break through to the other side, which again is like, that's what hull boxes are supposed to do. They're supposed to say the first few hits don't matter, and it's only when you get further out are you gonna. So I don't know, I'm really interested about it because it's such a, well, it's such a cool rule, and the way that you drop upgrades and then you have to veer across and like pick someone else's upgraded, all of that's lovely. But there are so many subsystems for resilience, and it's how to make them all not together, or how to take an audit and say, do you know what, there are about 4 too many here.
Yeah, so it's a system that we've been playing around with, and it's a lot of fun for us, and it's working well for us. But we are experts in Gaslands. We know the system inside out, and the question is to how much it's going to be helpful to the first-time players that are the people that we're trying to be helpful to. And so, in relation to that idea of helping out first-time players. One of the other things we've been looking into, fudging and tweaking and fiddling around with, is the pre-existing system of the votes in Gaslands. And I think, as Mike mentioned in a previous video, for us, through playtesting and designing Gaslands, I think there was, certainly for me, there was a sort of presumption that by game 3 everyone was going to be using votes. Everybody would be playing with the vote system rules after basically a couple of introductory games. That is fundamentally untrue. That is just not how a huge amount of people play Gaslands. And we've been wondering, I think, you know, particularly Mike, you've been wondering exactly why that is. And I think you came to that realization that, well, if you're playing votes, you're playing sponsors. If you're playing sponsors, you're playing perks. And if you're playing perks, you've got to read these pages and understand their interactions and follow through the interesting layered synergies that Glenn has obsessively written into all these little niggly rule systems and elements. And if you are fundamentally...
And we can all agree that the perks are a list of unique special rules where like you have to sit down and look at them. Like there's no quick cheat sheet for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And inherently, if you are playing Gaslands in a way that it's a fast, fun, you know, get stuff on the table, blow things up, you know, race around with your friends, you're ultimately never going to, every time you look at those perks, you're going to go, oh, what one day I'll figure those out. And and I do think people keep doing that, and they just keep not doing, and then going back to the game. So in order for votes to be able to improve the lives of those people, I think there are two things that have to happen. One, it would be nice if votes could do a range of other things, like, you know, if the point is that you die too quickly, maybe votes can give you a couple of hull back, and that seems like a sort of relatively easy thing to offer. And the other thing is that it has to be the base vote achieving mechanics maybe have to be broadened out a little bit, because there's not a grand bunch of ways of picking up votes without sponsors. And if we want people to be playing votes very, very early, and if they're a little bit twitchy about playing sponsors, maybe by saying, okay, here are a few more sexy things you can do with votes, and here are some you don't have to learn slimes, you know, pinball interactions ways of picking votes up. So do you want to sort of talk about how we've been starting to think about and fiddle with those ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose one of the things, I guess, underneath it all is like it's still a question in my mind, like, is that system doing what it's supposed to do, and is it necessary? Because the reason that it exists was as a catch-up mechanic, as a balancing mechanic. So if I'm getting squished and you're racing away, then that gives me a way of getting back into the game. But the way that the sponsors work is that, you know, ultimately the most reliable way of getting votes is to play really well within the confines of the special rules you've been given for your sponsor. So kind of on the final chew of it, it ends up being a system that rewards expert players rather than the dummies. And it was sort of initially, it was there to help the back markers get forward again. So that's one thing that I'm kind of wondering about. And the other is that we played a game recently with some stuff that we were playtesting, and for one reason or another, I was just being hosed votes at me, and I had, like, you know, probably a dozen given to me over a couple of rounds, and so I was spending them on stuff that I don't tend to spend, or spending them on stuff just more regularly than I tend to spend. You know, knocking off hazard tokens here, you know, bumping up my gears when I wiped out, you know, all the standard stuff. And being able to spend that stuff in a sort of like more liquid resource way, where I'm not like eking it out for the 2 and then the 3 and then I've got my respawn that I need. Like a Gaslands game where you wait all game for the 3 votes that you need to do the 1 respawn that's going to keep you back in the game. Like, maybe that's just a really stingy system. And maybe if we sort of reset the expectations of, like, hey, do you know what? Like, you start with a fistful of votes and you're going to be handed votes through the nose. And you know what? Everyone's going to get them. And people are going to be, like, you know, healing their cars and clearing the hazards. And, like, you know, the core engine of Gaslands is brutally like unsympathetic to people making bad decisions, which is one of the reasons that it's such a satisfying game when you start to really figure out the clockwork. But, like, do you know what? Maybe that's hard mode, and maybe easy mode is just like, here, have a fistful of votes, like, use them to not suck as much. Like, every time you get, it's interesting the way that Ramshackle Resilience says, like, at the end of a step, you know, discard an upgrade in order to ignore all the hazards from that. Like, that was horrible. I don't want any of that. Like, in a way, there could have been a version of that which is votes powered, which is just like, you get to the end of an entirely horrible step and you go, you know what, take 2 of my votes. I don't want any of that nonsense to have happened. That was abominable. And so I think playing with the vote system in terms of, like, is it a control hand like in Malifaux? Like, is it just something that you naturally expect to have is it the command tokens in A Billion Suns? Is it something that I just naturally have as a player in my hand to affect my team on my turn? And I can always expect to have some of them, and I'm always looking for opportunities to spend them. And does that actually make the game move faster and be more fun because it doesn't reward expert players so much, although making the right choices about where to deploy your resources is good. But like every turn, you get your 5 votes, and every turn you get an opportunity to like, oh god, I'm gonna have to spend 2 of my votes getting this guy that wiped out in second gear back up into third so that I can, get back in the game, etc., etc.
Yeah, and I think there's a sweet spot between only expert players get votes at a regular rate, which is the way. I don't know. I mean, expert to a certain degree, but it's certainly experienced players in Gaslands get votes regularly and continuously. The players that I play with, when I play, every team I pick, I'm picking up votes every single turn because I understand the system inside and out. Whereas what you don't necessarily want is there to be such a avalanche of votes that it makes all of the whole game just nerf. It's like, oh, you picked up a
maybe, but like that's why
vote.
video games have easy mode and normal mode and hard mode. Like,
Yeah, and
game one, maybe it does.
Yeah, but I think the issue with it is that if the votes nerf every piece of damage and hazard coming in, then whoever has the car that is fastest wins the game. Just because everyone's going to get into their top gear, and everyone's going to drive as fast as they can, and everyone's going to spin and steer how much they like, and just whoever's got whatever the performance car is definitely going to win because everyone's indestructible and nobody ever wipes out. And so it's just, you picked a car that only goes into fourth gear. That there are no more crunchy, pointy things to in the end. The mean parts of the game are the things that drive wedges between the different teams and the different players, and you do want a bit of wedge and a bit of lever to just it out so that the game itself has enough crunch to be interesting.
Which is why when we demo it, we give people identical teams, because they have a car and they have a buggy, and both of those are fairly easy to drive, and they have a nice time pootling around in a circle. Because exactly that, like, there are these differences that you don't know straight away.
And I think this is these are some of the things about Gaslands. I think personally for myself, there's a lot about becoming more comfortable and confident about how good the core parts of Gaslands, just the movement system of Gaslands, just the movement templates and the skid dice, going around a track with those core mechanics, it is inherently such a fantastic, is a really great experience, and people just love it, and it works really, really well. And I think more and more as we're going through this process, I'm feeling like in many ways a lot of the other bits and pieces are kind of bells and whistles that have been put in to make that part that a bit more explodey and a bit more sort of, yeah, you sure you're racing, but you're racing with a flamethrower. And and part of me feels like one of the best parts of this sort of going back and retinkering is that I feel more confident in saying, you know what, the racing is just absolutely fantastic. You'll love it to bits. It'd be nice to occasionally flamethrower somebody, but it doesn't need to be the thing that you're reaching for through the whole game. It can be a thing where you toast somebody lightly with your flamethrower as you go past, and it was a giggle, and the flamethrower wasn't too expensive and not too damaging. But ultimately what you're enjoying is going, now watch this slide into a spin out of around this corner. Because I personally,
well, I think that's where, and we probably come back to this at some other point in one of these conversations, but that's where there's this tension between writing a skirmish game where you have like 6 to 8 models, and they are disposable because even by the end of the game, you still got maybe a couple, and so you've got some people to play with, and like essentially a heroic miniatures game where you maybe have one figure, and you don't really lose that figure until right at the very end. And like Gaslands has sat in this odd place that very few other miniature games wrestle with, which is the sort of 2, 3, 4 miniature area. And so you want Gaslands to be explodey, but when one car explodes, that's like 30 to 50% of your sort of decisions gone for the rest of the game. And so, yeah, like the racing is fun. You want to be flamethrowing people. It's exciting when stuff blows up. But like when one person loses a car, the experience suddenly becomes really lopsided for them. And so it's weird. It's like, it's part of the reason why, maybe the resilience question is, or maybe you dial it down and you go, well, actually 30 cans is a better number because you want 1 or 2 cars rather than 3 or 4 cars. And then you focus the game on, well, let's see that heroic driver do a bunch of cool stuff and make it to the end. And maybe they win and maybe they lose. And maybe they just end up in a ball of fire right at the end, but you don't want like heroic driver crashes out on gear phase 3 of the first round.
I think one of the ironies about Gaslands in a way is that shooting teams are like blue control decks from Magic the Gathering. A blue control deck's job is to primarily sit there and go, no, you won't have fun. No, you won't have. Oh, you think you're going to have some fun? No, you're not. No. Nope. Run out of stuff. Great, now I get to win. And there is a degree to where, and it's weird because obviously loading up a truck with a bunch of guns and a bunch of rockets and some Molotov cocktails, right? And also you're obviously engaging with the slam, bang, blow things up. I'm not some sort of fun-sucking game.
Yeah, I'm not one of those people that just like races away and chooses to not engage with the game by running into the sunset. No.
I am the bringer of the fireworks factory. I am the bringer of the explosions. I'm the guy that you need for your cinematic moments. But fundamentally, a lot of the time, what the shooting is doing is, as the race is going, I'm matching in all these bits and pieces and I'm steering around, and then the shooter comes up and goes, nope. Nope. I'm just taking your stuff off. Take your stuff off and take your stuff off and take your stuff off.
That brings an idea to my mind. So right at the very beginning of Gaslands, as with many things, I nicked a bit of the X-Wing system and bolted it on as a sort of damage card system. So when you got shot, you would pull a card and it would say like, you've lost your wing mirror, like, or in some cases it'd be like, you've got a broken axle, you can't turn
you can only turn left. I remember the only turn left version of Gaslands.
Yeah, the only turn left version. But what is interesting is, if the game is ever so slightly sort of lent towards slightly more heroic play, then maybe there's some reason why shooting a car makes it more dangerous to be driving around in that car, but it doesn't fundamentally stop you from playing the game. So I don't know that it's, may only turn left, but it's something like, it's something around like, instead of chipping off hull points until you lose your last hull points and you're not allowed to play anymore. It's like, it's like the rotating chest piece of what was He-Man's
Skeletor.
Skeletor, right? I don't know if you have the same toy. He has a chest place with no damage, and then one like sword swipe, and then 2 sword swipes.
There were 2 versions of the He-Man and a Skeletor, battle damage He-Man and Skeletor.
Battle damage, yeah, exactly. And so maybe there's an alternative damage system for Gaslands where like totally running at full steam, have 1 battle damage, have got some weakness introduced, like 2 battle damage, like I am, gosh darn it, I'm going to limp burning and leaking oil to the finish line. I'm still going to make it, but like it suddenly got harder for me and I have to work more difficult for it.
I mean, my personal suspicion is that it needs to be the what will help out is simply the shortening, a bit of a shortening of ranges, because I think possibly one of the things to look at.
Gaslands already has one of the most comically short-ranged guns in.
I'm aware of relative to the speed we're traveling, etc. But fundamentally, if the shooting team is just behind the racing team, and is basically one activation off of the finish line anyway, and because they're just behind you, they manage to sort of take you down, and you blow up and they smash through your still burning wreckage to cross the finish line. That's great. I think the thing that sometimes rankles is when the shooting team is the full length of their rockets behind around a corner. You're halfway through, between gate 3 and gate 4. They've just crossed gate 1, and because of the figure 8, they just go, brilliant, there we go. Now I'll creep round very slowly. You feel like you didn't earn that. you're not under just behind.
I don't know. I mean, that's why trucks are so rubbish at driving, though, is because it forces you to behave in that way, or rather,
I mean, as an overall design
ethos, might be the other way around,
I think as an overall design ethos of the game, I think one of the things about Gaslands is that it throws in a bunch of stuff all together. It's covering a lot of bases. And I think there is a point where we're going to have to, I think, look at some of the jobs that it's doing that are possibly contradictory to some of the other jobs it's doing, and pick which one that is that we want to do now.
Well, we've been talking recently about A Billion Suns Warzone, the expansion for A Billion Suns that's called Warzone, and like the development of A Billion Suns gave me this idea of like, I think it was partly from this sort of metaphor that Sean Sutter gave me, that like my miniature collection is a Nintendo Entertainment System, and the rule systems that I buy, which are miniature agnostic, are like Nintendo cartridges. And in many regards, like that modularity is something that I deliberately built into A Billion Suns, where the core engine is good, and then the different contract sets will provide you with fundamentally different tabletop experiences. And I suppose, having just come out of that experience of working on the second game cartridge for A Billion Suns, I think that's where the sort of the idea of is Gaslands actually a Nintendo Entertainment System, and where I've tried to push the system with scenarios, and I lent much harder into this in the Blue Book, where some of the scenarios are like the original Blue Book scenarios get kind of wacky almost immediately, and I lent into that a bit in Refueled, but like they aren't as coherent as game experiences, or they aren't as delineated as game experiences as the Billion Suns ones are. So I think it is, it's plausible to imagine a Nintendo Entertainment System version of Gaslands where it says like, here's the Death Race like cartridge, and it only provides you with the options that are fun for Death Race, and like here's the other one that people love playing, which Glenn absolutely hates, which is like, here's the Arena of Death cartridge. And it just doesn't try and mix things that don't work together. Like everyone says, how do you get Miyazaki to work in an Arena of Death? And the answer is, you just don't. Like, she just loses. Like, there just isn't a good answer, because it's trying to do both of those things in the same system. And if you look across the scenarios that are in Gaslands Refueled, you'll find attempts in each of them, in some ways, in some situations more strained than others, to make sure that we can support the racers, the brawlers, and the shooters. And in some regards, like maybe that would just be better if they were delineated, and like there were fewer options to choose from for Death Race, but all of them led to more fun Death Races, and there were fewer options to choose from for Wasteland Skirmish, blow them up and chase them down type things, but all of them led to more explodey fun times. So maybe that's part of the resilience question, is actually like resilience is a factor of like asking the game to do too many things at the same time.
Yes, possibly, but still, those are a couple of the ideas we've been kicking around in relation to making Gasland teams more survivable. As often happens with some of these chats, that's turned into a bit of a live development conversation, I think, sort of halfway through. But as I say, these are ideas that are live, and that we are consciously tweaking and fiddling and rewriting. And in relation to
yes, yeah, exactly. So what I wanted to say was, over the next few months, you'll see some experimental rules pamphlets drop on the Gaslands blog. By the time you watch this video, some of them may have already been out. Planning to release the Wipeout one first, and then maybe Evades next. And as we sort of get a bead on what the heck the answer to this resilience question is, then hopefully you'll see another R&D sort of rules pamphlet drop for your playtesting or house rule joy at home.
Yeah, so if you're watching this video and if you're curious to see where we've gotten to in giving you tools to make it so that your teams actually get to the finish line on your death races, beat a hasty path over to gaslands.com, where there are going to be a handful of experimental living rules documents, PDFs, that will show you where we've gotten to and what rules we've come up with to try and smooth off, even out, and generally elevate your Gaslands game playing experience. So if you have watched this video and you've not been too put off by us sort of going off into developmental territory, please like and subscribe. If you have found our developmental discussion super interesting and have some fantastic ideas and opinions about how better we could fiddle around with Gaslands, if in your own designs you're finding that people aren't reaching the point in the game that you wanted them to get to necessarily, especially on the first experience, maybe tell us how you've changed or altered some mechanics in order to allow people to get to the place that you thought that they should be getting to with the game. Either way, give us a comment, reach out to us on social media. But for this conversation of Rule of Carnage, I think we're going to say goodbye. So bye.
Goodbye for the pasts. Hello, future people.